Hi there, and welcome to your weekly top-up of oenological nonsense decanted from my brain, wine Bert, and into yours at the other end of this video. Thank you so much for joining me today. Now, in line with what was Shiraz Day yesterday, the 22nd of July, I figured let's do a nice little segment on that grape variety, Shiraz. So where do we start? Well, where did Shiraz start? As Syrah, let's put it that way. Shiraz and Syrah are the same thing, but they are pronounced differently, and although they are the same grape, they now represent different styles. There are these sort of speculations as to where Shiraz came from, and some of those range from the Romans spreading it across the earth from the town of Syracuse in Sicily all the way to the ancient Roman Pliny the Elder mentioning it in his writings, talking about this vitis syriaca, this idea that maybe it came from Syria. And there are also some speculations that it might have even came from Shiraz in Iran. Unfortunately, the story isn't quite as romantic as that, and all of which are false. So with technology being the way that it is today, we're able to dissect the DNA of the grape variety and almost pinpoint exactly how it came about and where it came about. And Shiraz is a crossing of two different grape varieties, both of which are pretty much extinct and certainly not really used anymore. You won't find them on a label, let's put it that way. And that was from, if you'll excuse my pronunciation, the area of Savoie in France, near the Alps. But in the 18th century, Shiraz, Syrah, found its home in the Rhone Valley, and this is where we've all come to love this beautiful grape variety. And there are certain parts of the northern Rhone that you're only allowed to plant as your red grape variety, Syrah. Côte-Rôtie, Hermitage, Saint-Joseph, and each one having its own unique and distinctive style. After the Rhone Valley, it spreads its way down. We see it planted in the Languedoc de Russon, Vaucluse, all these sort of other areas heading down towards southern France, famously in GSM blends, Grenache, Shiraz, Mourvèdre. And for that reason alone, it is, in terms of how much Shiraz is planted in one nation, France is number one, which is incredible considering what I'm going to go on to next. So I think for a lot of people, the idea of Shiraz and what it is comes from the Australian Shirazes that we see pushed out onto the market. And the reason we see so much is because it represents 40% of the entire wine export that Australia sends out to the world, which is an astronomical amount, 40%. So 4 out of 10 wines that Australia sends out into the world are Shiraz. And Shiraz, or Syrah, at that point was first taken over to Australia in the 1830s. And it made its way all the way from the Hunter Valley to the south, where we see it today in places like the McLaren Vale and the Barossa Valley, famously the Barossa. And no one's entirely sure where the pronunciation Shiraz came from, but you can almost guarantee that this time around it was something to do with the language and not the DNA. There was a misspelling when they took the vine over originally, and it, I think, combined with the Australian accent, ended up bastardizing the word Syrah, and that's where the word Shiraz came from, but did us an amazing favour because it's created two names for the same grape with multiple styles. And after Australia, we start to see it in places like America, all along the California coast, and South America, Chile, Argentina. It is a widely planted grape variety with a wide spectrum of styles and is appreciated the world over exactly for that. So what are the differences and what are the styles? So I remember having a really interesting conversation while I was out in Pfalz in Germany with a winemaker over there, Oliver Zetter, and one of my favourite winemakers in Germany, I must point out. He grows Syrah in Pfalz, which is probably all due to the wonderful thing that we call global warming, because I certainly don't think he would have been doing that sort of 40, 50 years ago. And one of the things he referenced was the fact that they call their Syrah and not Shiraz, because Syrah is more feminine. It's softer. The fruit is more delicate, and it starts to hit these notes of sort of violets, these floral notes that sit in the background. The slightly more robust versions of Syrah, you might get these bacony notes, these white pepper notes, and then we go into the world of Shiraz, and the Shiraz is the sort of what's considered the more masculine, the more boisterous, the blackberry compote, the jammy, the sweet styles. And rather than it sort of being just bacon, you get these sort of cooked meats, these gamey, everything in terms of, I guess, intensity of flavour. And that doesn't necessarily add to complexity, and it certainly doesn't simplify the wine either. One thing I would suggest is that I imagine in my thoughts, I feel like Shiraz lends itself better to a simplified table wine than a Syrah could. And that's why I think you see a lot of sort of cheaper priced Shirazes. Now, you can find more expensive Shiraz, but the most expensive Syrah you will find is almost certainly from the Northern Rhone. And my little tip, my little hint for you today is that if you are buying Syrah from the Northern Rhone, albeit rather expensive, try and find something with a bit of age on it. And by a bit of age, I'm talking, you know, if you can, 7+ years, ideally 10+. And the reason being is because the Syrah from the Northern Rhone, as it ages, just becomes this beautiful wine. That sort of plummy fruit, that white pepper, and the tannin, that soft tannin, it all sort of becomes more integrated, and the floral notes become slightly more prominent, and that sort of little back bit of bacon sort of starts to hit out a little bit more, and it all becomes more cooked. And especially if you've had a Syrah from that area that's had a little bit of oak aging on it, because then you get this sort of sweet hint of vanilla and these cooked spices on the undertones. It really is an astonishingly good style of wine. And it's not to say that you can't get really good and complicated Shirazes from the New World, but I think for me it's just a personal preference. I would always try and go for a Syrah from the Old World. But yeah, thank you very much for joining me today. Pop down to your local wine merchants, try yourself at some Syrah, try yourself at some Shiraz. Either way, I recommend that you try maybe one of each from 2 different styles and sit there and try and gauge which one you like the most and for what reasons, and that alone will help you sort of venture out into other things that you might like. But yeah, a great variety that absolutely deserves its own day, a great variety that really deserves celebrating. Tons of history, tons of complexity, but at the same time creates something simple and beautiful. And one last thing, I've said it before and I'll say it again, you have a finite number of glasses of wine in this lifetime. Don't waste a single one of them. And if you can, drink your Shiraz from a Riedel Shiraz glass. Cheers, take care.